You want to wait one more minute?
Yeah. Where's Lois? See.
Yeah. Do it. Like to call the Fraser Town Board meeting. Like to call the Fraser Town Board meeting to order at 4:05 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Katie Fisher. Peggy Smith.
Julie White.
Katie Souls.
Brian Cirkvenik. I would entertain a motion to approve today's agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Moving on to discussion on possible action regarding resolution 2024-0707, approving the final plat and major site plan for Victoria Village Phase 1. Garrett.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. The first item on the agenda this evening, as Mayor Cirkvenik mentioned, is the approval of the final plat and major site plan for Victoria Village Phase 1. So applicant and property owner, Town of Fraser, as well as Mountain Affordable Housing Development. Property is located in the area bounded by Park Avenue, Highway 40, County Road 8, and the Twin Rivers condos. The proposed land uses in this application include 131 deed-restricted multifamily residential units, approximately 8,400 square feet of childcare facilities, as well as approximately 2,900 square feet of general commercial space. The property is zoned business with Victoria Village overlay, and again, the request is for approval of the final plat and major site plan. Here's an aerial showing the location of the development, which I know you all are familiar with. Speaking to the timeline of the submittal and review of this application. So back in June of last year, the board approved the Victoria Village Master Plan. The master plan served in lieu of the sketch plan or preliminary plat submittal process. As you all likely recall, that master planning process involved significant public engagement as well as a formal resolution that the board approved back in June of last year. And this process is above and beyond what's typically done or required for a sketch plan, which is why staff believes that this master plan essentially serves in lieu of a sketch plan or preliminary plat process. The applicant did submit their final plat and major site plan application in April of this year. Since that time, 2 rounds of review have occurred on the submittal. And then just a week ago on July 24th, a public hearing was held and the Planning Commission ultimately recommended approval of the application via Planning Commission Resolution 2024-0701. Here's a look at the site plan for the development, and phase 1 includes everything to the south that is not in the hatched area, as well as the entirety of Victoria Village Way from County Road 8 to Park Avenue. So talking through some of the planning and zoning review items, starting with the intent of the Victoria Village District. As a reminder, the district or the intent of each zone district is essentially saying, the vision or purpose of that zone district. And for Victoria Village, it reads development that provides a unique walkable neighborhood that brings additional housing options within proximity to downtown Fraser. This proposal clearly meets the intent of the zone. Other zoning standards, so mixed use development in either the same development area or a group of buildings is a permitted use in both the business and the Victoria Village zone districts. The specific uses proposed in this application, which are a childcare center, commercial retail or personal service use, and multifamily residential, those are all permitted uses as well. And the application meets all applicable zoning standards, including setbacks, building height, open space, and residential density. I did want to briefly discuss some of the details on the open space that is proposed through this application. So this land use chart here is from the cover sheet or sheet C of the site plan. And it indicates a total area of about 79,000 square feet of landscaped open space out of approximately 229,000 square feet of total site area in phase one. This is approximately 35% open space. However, the landscape plan on sheet L1 of the site plan notes approximately 54,000 square feet of landscaped open space area, which is approximately 24% of phase one. This discrepancy might be because this table that's shown here, I believe it's not counting landscaping for parking lot areas. Our code requires landscaping for both parking lot perimeters as well as the interior of large parking lots. And I think it's excluded from this number. I'm frankly not totally certain. But, staff does not, have any concerns with the open space being provided in this application. One thing I also wanted to mention is that the overall site itself is anticipated to include much more than 35% open space, which is what is required by the zone district. This is because of the area shown in yellow. This is the protected natural area or P&A that exists over St. Louis Creek. This area alone is roughly 2.7 acres and accounts for approximately 24% of the total site area of Victoria Village. So long as approximately 1.25 acres or about 54,000 square feet of open space are provided across all phases of the Victoria Village development, in addition to this P&A, then the open space requirement will be met. And phase one is providing at least that 54,000 square feet of open space. Are there any questions or comments on this? It's kind of diving into some details. Moving on to design guidelines. So per that section of our code, all commercial and mixed-use developments are encouraged to meet various building design guidelines. Again, it's encouraged, not required. But with that said, the application does meet many of these guidelines as detailed on page 4 of the staff report that is in the meeting packet. Specific guidelines that are met are the orientation of buildings, building colors, windows for commercial spaces, energy conservation, as well as some aspects of the building elements and materials that are being used. Speaking to the site access, phase one is dedicating the entirety of the right-of-way for Victoria Village Way in this plat. Again, that's the north-south kind of collector road through the site. However, the portion that crosses St. Louis Creek cannot be built until certain permits and approvals are obtained from both FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers. This is why in the site plan, there is this, get my laser pointer here. There's this call out here that says that Victoria Village Way extension and crossing to be completed in phase two. Really, I guess just to clarify the timing of that, I would really say it's more of a phase 1B, if you will. And it will be completed with, phase one of the buildings being buildings C, D, and E. So speaking to some of the permits and approvals that are required in the timeline to obtain those. So JVA and Grand Environmental that are part of the Mountain Affordable Housing Development team are submitting what's called a CLOMAR application to FEMA within the next month or so. Essentially what this application will do is modify the boundary of the floodway of St. Louis Creek. And then also at the same time, they'll be applying to the Army Corps of Engineers to modify the boundary of the P&A so that the P&A does not go through this area here where the bridge is proposed. And they'll also be applying for a permit to construct this bridge itself from the Army Corps. So assuming those applications get submitted, within the next month or so, it's anticipated that these approvals from FEMA and the Army Corps would be granted by approximately spring of next year, spring of 2025. And then, the bridge and the portion of the road north of St. Louis Creek would likely be built in, August to October of next year, as this is when, the stream flow will be lowest during the construction season next year. And also speaking to that timeline as it relates to the construction of the buildings, the phase one buildings, C, D, and E will likely not be finished and ready for occupancy until approximately Q3 of 2026. So, speaking to the bridge, it will likely be built, almost an entire year before that. So it's very highly likely that the bridge will be constructed and the road be open before the buildings are ready to be occupied. With that said, the Planning Commission did add a condition of approval that this road be completely constructed and open before certificates of occupancy are issued for building C, D, and E, and that condition of approval has been carried over into the resolution in the packet, just as an additional measure to ensure that the road is in fact completed. Another thing with regards to site access, the parking lot for building E is accessed via Park Avenue and Park Place. Park Place being this shorter road here. There have been concerns raised by residents and property owners in the Twin Rivers condos that this arrangement could cause cut-through traffic through the Twin Rivers development. However, town staff does not believe that either construction traffic or traffic from the development once completed is likely to utilize Sterling Way as a cut-through route, especially considering the condition that Victoria Village Way be completed before these buildings are occupied. However, staff has heard these concerns and we are committed to working with property owners in Twin Rivers and the HOA to identify and help implement an appropriate solution to ensure that, cut-through traffic is minimized. Speaking to the parking standards and requirements for phase one. So phase one is providing a total of 240 parking spaces, which is more than enough to serve the minimum requirement for phase one, which is 192 spaces. These additional spaces above the minimum that are being provided are being allocated towards future phases of the development, specifically the parking spots located kind of in the northwest area of the large parking lot, as well as the parallel parking spaces along Victoria Village Way in close proximity to St. Louis Creek. We also had some comments about, the parking lot being close to Highway 40. Just as a reminder, the location of this parking lot and the buildings as shown on the site plan is largely consistent with the approved master plan from last year. And in staff's opinion, locating the parking lot adjacent to Highway 40 is, a better alternative than having it closer to Victoria Village Way and Building C being located closer to Highway 40. And as will be shown on the next slide, landscaping is proposed along Highway 40 to help screen the parking lot, visually from the highway. We also had some comments during the public hearing regarding pickup and drop off for the proposed childcare facility that's in Building E. So essentially, the town would work with grandkids to designate some of these parking spaces allocated for Building E as, pickup drop off areas. I think one area that would work well are the parallel parking spaces right in front of the building. Those could be signed and striped in a way that it's for pickup and drop off for the childcare facility only, and not just for general parking. Here's a view of the landscaping that is proposed throughout phase one. Again, it meets all applicable town code and requirements. Another landscaping related item is the trash enclosures. These are, to be completely enclosed on all four sides, and they utilize the same exact materials as the buildings themselves. So they'll look quite nice. Finally, I just wanted to talk about snow storage. So, snow storage is certainly a challenge anywhere here in Fraser, but particularly where you have large surface parking lots, as is proposed here. The snow storage plans included in this application.
Awesome.
We have ways. We'll get it out.
Hopefully that bird can find its way out.
Gotta find the paddle.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so snow storage areas have been identified, and the area identified for snow storage is sufficient in size to serve the areas to be cleared. But some areas that are identified for snow storage don't meet some specific code requirements. Specifically, some snow storage areas were identified in close proximity to proposed fire hydrants, like here on the south side of Building C, or here there's a proposed fire hydrant. And additionally, snow storage is also currently shown to be located in close proximity to some existing wetlands, and our code requires that snow storage not be located within 25 feet of wetlands. However, there are other areas on site, areas that would be developed in phase 2 that could be utilized in as snow storage in the short term. And when phase 2 is ultimately built, other snow storage areas, potentially offsite, would need to be identified. So in conclusion, staff's recommendation is approval with conditions by an affirmative vote on resolution 2024-07-07. The current conditions of approval in that resolution are summarized here on the slide. They match the conditions of approval from the Planning Commission resolution from last week. But certainly staff is open to adding any other conditions of approval as the board sees fit. And that concludes my presentation.
Garrett, when did you say that the road and bridge is anticipated for completion?
Yeah, so the entirety of Victoria Village Way is expected to be complete by the end of next summer. I would say October of 2025 at the latest.
And then a question about the snow storage. On that chart, it's basically over a building in phase 2. At the end of that parking lot, do we have a plan to move snow somewhere? I mean, or is that temporary till we move on to phase 2?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly recognize that snow storage areas are proposed in areas that would be developed in phase 2. Ultimately, staff is supportive of this arrangement, recognizing that, the timeline of phase 2 or subsequent phases being developed is not certain. So ultimately, so long as whenever that development does occur, certainly an alternative snow storage arrangement would need to be identified at that time.
Yeah, because the majority of the snow storage is not on the plat we're actually approving.
That's fair, but it is on property that the
Yeah.
town owns and it's part of the broader site. So again, I think just depending on the timeline of when these subsequent areas get developed, say if it's, the townhomes that get developed first and buildings A and B aren't included in the next phase, these snow storage areas would absolutely need to be relocated. So.
Is it a town? Sorry, is it a town requirement that we have landscaping in the middle of the parking lots? That just looks like a really stupid idea in a place where we've got a lot of snow plowing.
It is a code requirement for parking lots above a certain size to have a certain number of landscaped islands that help break up the parking lot. I believe, this has been in our code since at least 2018 when we last kind of did a comprehensive rewrite or cleanup of our land development code. I'm not sure if that requirement existed prior to then. But if you kind of compare this landscaping plan, and I'll keep the laser pointer here, there's, landscaping on these islands, but they're not snow storage areas. So
But they're curbs and gutter and I don't know. My son was in charge of plowing all of the commercial spaces. That just looks like a nightmare to me.
Yeah, I think the bigger nightmare is just having a big slab of asphalt.
I agree.
Like, it just
Yeah.
looks bad.
Is there a walkway in the middle of those islands or not?
No,
No.
no, because they're more or less completely landscaped. I mean, I think there's certainly pros and cons. I agree with Trustee White that having these landscaped islands is visually much better than just a sea of asphalt, but I think the con is that, they can't be utilized for snow storage. I mean, realistically, they just can't when there's trees and shrubs and landscaping there. Um, so,
And I'm guessing there'll be, I should know, but lighting in there on this.
yes, so there is, yes, there's both luminaires for the parking lot as well as some exterior lighting on the buildings themselves. I forget the specific sheet in the site plan where that is, but there's a lighting and photometric plan in the site plan. My recollection is that the lighting, I believe the parking lot luminaires are located in the landscaped islands, but I could verify that. Correct.
My other question is, pedestrian and bike traffic, like getting through Victoria Village Way to County Road 8, which eventually will have a light there,
Yes.
right? I don't see any sort of like path, or is there a sidewalk or something here that I'm missing, or?
So there are sidewalks proposed on both sides of Victoria Village Way, as well as along the north side of Park Avenue. There's also a gravel trail proposed parallel to Highway 40. I
Oh,
can,
that like shaded one?
correct.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Mhm. And just going back to speaking to exterior lighting, this is the illumination plan. So as you see, um, if you can see my cursor, yeah. This is, some, not all of the islands have luminaires proposed in the parking lots. Some street lighting is also proposed along Victoria Village Way. Again, all fixtures are dark sky compliant. One other comment, just since it's up on the screen with regards to kind of multimodal access, right where the cursor is, this is a proposed bus stop for the Lyft Transit. So the curb, bumps out here, so that the bus would just stop in line with the lane, if that makes sense.
Oh,
But-
it wouldn't pull off the street. It would just stop there.
Correct. And this, would be like a area for bus stop or shelter. Um, Sidewalk goes right behind it, and again, sidewalk on both sides of Victoria Village Way.
Open space is well big. That's why, we talked about it planning, trying to bring the parking lot and the road that would connect over
Oh.
Victoria Village Way and all that, but
Yeah,
we have the wellhead there.
gotcha.
Yeah, and it obviously adds a little more green space, which is kind of nice too.
Mm.
Katie, when we were in planning commission, we talked about that condition of the road. The only concern I have about that, is like if we were withholding COs and the road isn't finished because of,
Yeah.
unforeseen circumstances with the Army Corps of Engineers or something like that, are we really not gonna fill the rooms when we're paying for them? So that's the only part of the planning commission that I would say to adjust, but other than that, I would say to go with what the planning commission said. What do you think?
Tough one because there was so much feedback from the community with concerns about that topic.
Mhm.
once we get it occupied. And that you need access from aid, not from,
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly want the access. I'm just wondering if the COs,
So
right,
is that a possibility that that could be amended at a later date? I mean, because construction is pretty much a known factor. It's the Army Corps that's the issue.
Mhm.
If we run into that, can we come back in and amend this to, or is this like cast in stone like the Ten Commandments?
And to that, we do resolutions to amend resolutions sometimes, right?
Really, we're just doing the resolution, I think. Not really a resolution.
Well, I mean, a resolution to,
You can reference that,
essentially
that
change.
one, the resolution and then, yeah, amend the conditions in it to change it. More or less.
I mean, yeah, the intent is to get the road done.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I don't want it to be, we have these buildings that are done and we're just, stuck.
because Army Corps throws in a monkey wrench.
Yeah, I'd rather have it be less restrictive in a sense, but I understand the need for access too.
and it'll be good access if it's open a year, if it's completed a year before the buildings are, that's a whole year that construction traffic can be using that road as well.
Mhm.
Right,
That's huge.
now we better for
Mhm.
the guy that did the building.
What about Park Avenue? Is that going to be expanded? Is it staying the same size? Are we? I mean, I know it's not a part of this plat, but it's bordering it. Is there any? I mean, are they gonna put a dotted? I don't think there's even a dotted line down that road. Is there, or bike lanes or anything?
No, and that's a good point. I guess no improvements are proposed right now or through this proposal
Mm-hmm.
for Park Avenue. Something that was discussed was at the minimum, where Park Avenue meets Highway 40, there's sufficient right of way that you could, just pave some additional asphalt and then stripe separate left turn and right turn lanes for folks turning northbound or southbound on Highway
Okay.
40.
Mhm.
And certainly if you do that, you'd want to also stripe a center line. I think that's something that the town could just plan to do, say, next summer. The width of Park Avenue, I believe, is 60. Yes.
The right of
but-
way is.
If the budget time, if the board decides we want Park Avenue to be a priority, which I think we should, that would be the time for the board to make a decision. about,
Mhm.
Planning to expand that. I think that would be important.
Yeah.
But now,
Something to think about in the future. Yeah.
yeah,
And once CDOT has their design plans finalized, we can help design that so it does integrate well into those plans.
right.
So just speaking to that a bit further, this line here is the southern edge of the right of way for Park Ave, and then here's the northern edge up on the Victoria Village property. And these dash lines here are like edge of pavement and where the drain pans are, I believe.
Hmm.
So it certainly could be widened and still be within the right of way.
Okay.
I'm gonna close this door.
So the proposed sidewalk or path will be on which property? The right of way or the Victoria Village?
I'll pull that up.
Is it,
The sidewalk along Park Avenue it looks like it's proposed within the right of way.
okay,
But adjacent to the Victoria Village site. So here's the proposed sidewalk.
the dot, the big black bolded line, that's the lot line?
There is.
Yeah. The
Okay.
dash line is the property line.
Okay.
So this area is in the right of way where the sidewalk is located.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
The bird.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Would anyone like to make a motion?
So do we need to amend this to change that condition?
It's up to the person who makes the motion.
Mm-hmm. We can give it 3 blasts and then we can make our motion.
You want me to find the words?
Wait.
Okay.
Let's stop now.
Yeah, go for it. You want to unmute your mic?
I move to approve the resolution approving final plat and major site plan for Victoria Village Phase 1, a mixed-use development with affordable housing units, childcare facilities, and a commercial space, being a replat of portion of Victoria Village subdivision reception number 142175, part of Section 19, Township South, Range 75 West of the 6th Principal Meridian Town of Fraser of Grand County, State of Colorado.
Would you like to amend?
And after discussion, the board would like to remove condition number 1, which, oh no, it's
No.
number 2. No certificates of occupancy shall be issued until the north-south connector road through the development currently identified as Victoria Village Way is completed and open between County Road 8 and Park Avenue. As concerns over the Army Corps of Engineers approval could delay this beyond what the construction schedule has proven.
Is there a second? Further discussion? All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thanks, Garrett. All right. Moving on to letter B, ordinance 515, emergency ordinance approving lease option agreement for Victoria Village. Michael,
Should we wait for our next board member to arrive so he can participate in this discussion?
Gets in that break.
yeah, let's do a 10-minute break. We're expecting our 6th board member to be able to vote on this. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, we will bring the meeting back to order and go into ordinance 515, emergency ordinance approving lease option agreement for Victoria Village. Michael.
Right, thank you, Mayor. So what is before for you is just a staff briefing going over the lease agreement with some of the background information and the major terms as outlined in the lease agreement. Also online, we have Austin Flanagan, who's been our land use attorney, who was with us for our last meeting,
Okay.
that joined us during executive session. And some representatives from SB Clark, who has been, I'll let them provide an introduction kind of after I get through this staff briefing here.
Did they help draft this ground lease? Are they
did.
reviewed and edited? Okay.
Yep. So we've done red lines from both our legal team and their legal team, and kind of gone back and forth, and we've kind of settled on these terms.
Okay.
You know, in an ideal world, we would have a development agreement in place before we do a master lease. But in lieu of a development agreement, we've tried to negotiate as much as we can possibly think of to put into the master lease, to ensure that it's a good deal for both sides. Yeah, just kind of start moving right along. One thing real quickly is, you know, we did the board did adopt the Victoria Village Master Plan July of last year, following a series of workshops. I think it's nice to say, hey, we just approved the final plat and major site plan for phase one. I think that's a great achievement. It's nice to acknowledge those things. I know that we're plowing ahead and trying to move this project forward, but it's come a long way from the workshops to final plat and the major site plan approval. So just appreciating the board, appreciating our workers with Matt on that, and for them getting that done. So thank you. Progress. So kind of walking through the staff briefing here. What is before you tonight for this agenda item, and very much the reason for this scheduling of a special meeting, was to discuss this emergency ordinance 515, which executes a lease agreement with Mountain Affordable Housing Development for Building D as depicted on Victoria Village Master Plan. Actually, that building is actually shown on a map at the bottom of the lease agreement link in this agenda item, if you wish to see that. So again, building D as in Delta. So the intent is to enter into this lease agreement with MAD that is contingent on them acquiring the 4% low-income housing tax credit and Colorado State Affordable Housing Tax Credit by the end of this year. They're looking to apply for this tax credit tomorrow, and that's part of the reason of this special meeting being scheduled now. One was to ensure that we had the final plat and major site plan approved for it. That helps with the application for this tax credit. And it just shows that it's shovel ready with an approved plat and site plan. And just a little bit of background, August 15th of 2022, almost 2 years ago, is when we published the RFQ, the request for qualifications, to identify a developer to work with for the master planning and development of Victoria Village. We did receive 10 RFQs from interested developers. We did an interview series for the final 4 finalists for that process. And that award letter for Mountain Affordable Housing was issued in December of 2022, with a subsequent agreement that was executed in January of 2023, which we are currently under for the completion of pre-construction services for Victoria Village. Since we've executed that agreement, next steps were the final plat and major site plan, which the town board just approved. And now the intent is to allow them, if the board so desires, to pursue this 4% LIHTC and TC tax credit application on August 1st, which is again tomorrow. So the execution of this lease agreement allows them to apply for this, in addition to approving the letters of commitment, which are a requirement to basically just kind of checklist items for the CHAFA application. One thing that is of good note is House Bill 24-1434 was recently approved, which increased the state funds for the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program that can be awarded through the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, otherwise known as CHAFA, with this year having a pot of $20 million to pull from for that tax credit. And that again is part of the intention of this meeting tonight to apply for August 1st, is this year has the largest pool of funds that's available for this, which may increase our chances of actually getting an award for this property. One main thing is what I have here on the screen. And again, in lieu of a development agreement between myself and Austin and representatives from SB Clark and Mountain Affordable Housing Development, we were able to work out these terms for this lease agreement that provides for the following. And my intent is I'll just go through each of these terms, and please, if you have questions, we can just stop and we can talk about it. This allows the town and Mountain Affordable Housing Development to enter into a 50-year lease with 3 15-year extensions available at MAD's discretion. That's something that we thought was good because it helps maintain the property as an affordable housing project. And again, these terms are up for discussion, and they can be up for negotiation if we would like to. So that would effectively, if MAD were to renew all 3 of those different leases, encumbers the property under the ownership of Mountain Affordable Housing Development for 95 years. This lease would automatically terminate if MAD is not awarded the 4% LIHTC award this year.
So I have a question.
mhm.
So, we've got the lease that would be part of this approving the emergency ordinance. Where does it talk about that, if they don't get the 4%, it's null and void? And what we're voting, or
Well, like what part of the lease?
what we're recommending? Is it in the emergency ordinance? I just don't have a copy of that, if there's specific wording for that, or?
Austin, can you direct us to the portion of the lease agreement for reference?
Do you want to see the ordinance, Katie?
Yeah, I do want to see the, it's probably in the ordinance, but I can't open it.
Is he a co-host? Can you make him a co-host, please?
I can't touch your screen.
Oh, yeah, I scroll with the pad.
Austin, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay. Can you guys hear and see me now?
Can hear you.
Hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, well, 1 of 2 isn't bad. So it's in section 2B of the lease. It's entitled termination. And I'm happy to go through that in more detail, but yeah, it's in section 2B of the lease, the provision that Michael just stated.
Okay, yeah, no, I was wondering about how it terminates if they aren't successful with the LIHTC. Oh, is
Yeah.
that B? There you go.
That's what
B
it
is in
says.
boy. I stopped. There it is. I see it now.
Oh, no worries.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, good.
Right. Next option here, next term, the town has the ability to terminate if MAD is in default of the lease provisions, essentially. If awarded the 4% LIHTC, the property will be encumbered with a federally mandated deed restriction that requires the following area median incomes, as shown in this table.
So
what happens-
60% is an average?
It
Done?
is.
Gotcha.
And Caitlin, can you unmute Laura Clark, please? Or you can make her a co-host. Laura Clark is with SB Clark, who works on these deals on a regular basis, and she can explain some of the requirements of CHAFA, I think in greater detail than any of us can. Hi, Laura.
Oh, thanks for having me today. Nice to see you all.
Yeah.
Mm.
So this is the affordability mix that is being committed to in the tax credit application that would then translate into the land use restriction agreement for a 40-year period. So it is an average income of the 58.9, but it is each of those income bands that's being committed to for that many units in each of those AMIs.
Thanks, Laura. And Laura, can you just provide a brief introduction of yourself?
Of course, sure. SB Clark Companies is a public finance consulting firm. The SB and SB Clark is my dad, Steve. He worked with me for the first 16 years of the firm, and now he's retired, but still hanging out. But that was excellent. His background was public finance, investment banking. I've worked with him for 20 years. The firm has grown to being primarily a low-income housing tax credit and new markets tax credit financing shop that helps developers who are developing in low-income areas or for low-income people using tax-advantaged financing techniques. We're now a team of 14 consultants and are glad to be doing this work and supporting you all in this goal.
Thanks, Laura. Moving right along. Again, the lease is for a 50-year term with 3 15-year extensions. The federal deed restriction that is in this table above, it expires at 40 years per CHAPA's requirements. But one thing that we do have in the lease agreement is that it does require the tenant of the property to maintain the average AMI of 60% throughout the life of the lease.
Okay. Laura, I've got a question for Laura. If I
Sure.
may. So, let's see if I can sort my brain out. We've got these fixed rates. If somebody, I know that, for one, I know that Clark supposedly with his had something similar and had a really hard time with the 30, 40, 50 because people can't afford to live here. They've all moved away that make that. But let's say we do find people that are in the 30% AMI, and they move in at that and they get another job and all of a sudden they're more like 80 or 90. Do they have to be evicted or can they stay? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Generally speaking, a person can stay in their tenant or in their unit and continue to income qualify up to 140% AMI before they would then be ineligible for that unit.
Okay.
As
cool.
long as they income qualified initially in the right AMI. There is something called the next available unit rule. So if somebody is renting a 30% AMI unit and they make more and they kind of grandfather themselves up, it is the property manager's requirement to attempt to fill back into the other AMI category that was moved on from by the other income
Gotcha.
earner.
Okay.
And so the nuance of that, we don't do the leasing. It's not my specialty, that compliance, but that's the general understanding of that next available unit rule. And that's the intent, is to not inadvertently kick people out of housing or displace people from housing, even though they move up in opportunity.
Okay. And so they don't necessarily move out of that particular unit, but it just is that status of a unit being available for somebody at 30%. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So Laura, I have a question. Is this table kind of a standard table that is used in all affordable housing LIHTC projects?
What an excellent question. The AMI bans here are what are allowed under the tax credit program. It actually, you could go down to 20% AMI. That is usually uncommon. Up to 80% AMI, and you could only go up to 80% AMI if it averages to less than 60. Otherwise, the program caps out at 60% AMI. Where we've put the AMIs is dependent on the developer and the community they're trying to serve. So I would say generally in a competitive tax credit round, which the state affordable housing tax credit round on tomorrow is a competitive round, the level of affordability in the lower you can go, often the more competitive it can be. However, CHAFA very carefully allows that the development can put this affordability mix into what they think is most effective for their community. So I think we've tried to balance here what we think is competitive, what we think can support enough senior loan through rent payments for the financing gap, with what the community needs, maybe a little bit more of the higher AMIs, given what we understand was the situation with the other development.
So this is not just, okay, we go and we get approval. This is going to be what we stick to, not, we can't come back in and say, well, the average AMI is 60. Can we just make all the units 60?
You can't.
Because,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause that's
CHAFA.
going to be really challenging, I think, for us to get 30 and 40, unless they're retirees and not working. Yeah, yeah.
I have questions on the 30% AMI as well. I mean, maybe I'm off in my head, but isn't AMI 75,000, give or take? I mean, at 30%, you're talking 22.5. That's $10 an hour, and that's just not even a
Yeah.
pay rate up here.
Right. And it's 60% AMI. Do you guys know what that number is? Do you have that
I can bring up the,
for rent?
I can get
I
it for you as
know we
well.
have that old schedule. I can find it.
So you're almost doubled.
So let me just
Is your
say
loan.
something there, that if we want to be able to allow for the 80% AMI units, we have to average to that 60, that 58.9%. So they're mathematically, unless we wanted them all at 60, we've got to get a few down at the lower AMI levels in order to achieve the opportunity for the higher AMI levels. And I would indicate that we have been very careful about what the rent levels are at those 60, 70, and 80s. So the 60%, 70%, and 80% AMI income restrictions is what the tenants have to income qualify as. The rents we are charging are trying to be achievable given the market. And so this 70% and 80% AMI rent levels are a little bit below the max rents to benefit those tenants and kind of open up the opportunity for them to get into those units. So I hear you on the 30s. We probably have to have a few just to open up the 70s and 80s.
My concern is it doesn't exist up here. That's a pay rate that is below the minimum wage up here. And so how do you fill that? And I understand the balancing equation that you're talking about. You have to have low ones to offset the high ones. But if that low one doesn't exist, then we're proceeding down a road under false premises.
Well, the market study and the housing needs assessment that were completed do identify that there are 30% AMI and 40% AMI need. We tried to minimize that to the extent possible in the program by having only one 30% AMI unit, which I think is fairly irregular for a tax credit deal, but it is absolutely responsive to what your community needs.
Somebody working really part-time.
Well, that was my next question is, does this require full-time employment or is part-time?
It requires a full-time lease, so it couldn't be like a seasonal worker. But if
Okay.
they only had income that they brought in an annual basis that was at the 30% AMI level, that would income qualify at the lower AMI.
Part of the beauty of it's not our problem, it's their problem.
Well, and that's kind of my next question. So we're pushing forward on this and we have faith in it, but if it does go awry, is there a contingency plan that
Yeah.
if we find 30s and 40s are difficult, how do we manage that situation?
Yeah. Laura, after the initial lease up is kind of rebalancing where how these AMIs land. Is that something that's has some flexibility to it or not?
No, you'll have to commit to the AMI bands that are submitted to CHAPA.
Surprised with younger folks that AMI at 30% is not that far out. I graduated a year ago.
And it is one unit.
But
At McDonald's, they're paying $20 an hour.
But what hours? What, at the end of the year, what's their W-2 say?
Maybe 30 grand, 35,
Maybe.
yeah,
I think they're out.
yeah. So if they don't get the LIHTC funding, the tax credit, then this is just gonna be
And nothing happens.
like the other buildings? We're gonna,
Yeah, so
What's
I
the
think
plan?
part of the intent with phase one is to have building C and E being able to address some of the middle income housing opportunities, and having this building going through the LIHTC route provides for those lower AMI brackets. And yeah, I understand the concerns of the 30, potentially the 40% AMIs, but I think between those 50 to 80, I mean, I think there's a lot of good meat there and good workforce opportunity there.
what I'm asking is, will we sign another lease with them if they don't get it this year and they'll try again next year?
So
Or
that's part of the intent, and you know, something we can look at is, to try to go for a 9% round, do we want to include additional building? Or do we want to stay on the same path? So those are things that we can visit later this year after we have a determination of this award.
Mhm.
And then what happens when their lease is up? The town leases it to somebody new?
So once the lease is up, let's say like at the 50 years, they don't renew for an additional 15-year extension. We would own that property. We have the ability to change the terms on those properties if we want to. And yeah, we can change the AMI mix if we want to. We can do whatever. But we would basically take over the assumption of the debt on the building, which is already being covered by the revenues on the rents for the residential and for the commercial on that building.
So that's the goal, huh? So for MAD, can you get, well, you've been in on this, so I assume that you feel like you can make it work with these low rents. And if you're gonna have the one building being your office, there's probably not much income coming off of that, so.
Matt Ginsburg, Mountain Affordable Housing. I got it right this time.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's like 3 data points. One, the housing needs assessment that broadly speaking, you all conducted 2 years ago. The polling that we did, and then the market study that you have to do to put the application in, that suggests that somewhere in the county, there's at least one person that needs a 30% AMI unit. Michael's point is right. Ultimately, that's what the personal guarantee is for on the deal. If you don't get it leased, then you got to put some money in to satisfy your tax credit investor, because they won't get a tax credit. So, I mean, this is a challenge with mountain towns and with this project, and why, you know, when we first came in and did the RFP, we said, hey, let's do, you know, there's a significant amount of demand that looks like it's lower income. Let's try to do as much LIHTC as we can. And then as we went through the process and got more feedback, you know, we had the conversation about what do you make if you work at Wendy's or McDonald's, and maybe the incomes are higher. And so we moved over to doing more middle income. Middle income's there is no straightforward path to finance middle income. So that's a more challenging and nuanced deal. That's, you know, that's why we have a lot of these conversations. The LIHTC stuff is pretty straightforward. And
Okay.
yes, we think we can find somebody to lease that unit.
Okay.
Otherwise it would be a poor decision for us.
Yeah, okay, good.
All right, good questions.
Well, it would allow us to, like, say, keep us out from a lot of the liability and allow for us to begin the project with something that's geared towards the lowest AMIs. And as a municipality, it's kind of our role when it comes into, you know, that we're not competing with the private sector because they're not willing to charge these low rents. And gets it off the ground.
Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
November, maybe December. The round is a little bit probably more competitive. There's almost twice as much tax credit available as normal, so I would expect things to be slightly different. So maybe end of November, beginning of December, but yeah, we think, I mean, obviously we think it'll be done by the end of the year because that's when the lease automatically dematerializes, so.
End of the year. So that's how the agreement's written. All right. All right, next bullet point. The developer will be provided a developer fee, 2.4 million roughly for the planning, construction and financial risk of building a D. This developer fee amount is permitted by the federal and state low-income housing tax credit program.
Yes, although I'm,
Yes,
it's Chaffa who does it, right? So
Okay.
I'll call it state.
Yes.
So essentially, the majority of that developer fee is paid by the actual tax credit.
It increases your basis too, you earn tax credit on it, so.
Okay, cool.
So it's kind of designed to become an incentive for developers to do these projects.
Gotcha.
To take the risk of leasing a 30% AMI unit.
There you go.
Right. That's a big risk.
I think there'll be some potential employment opportunities on site. We'll see. Next bullet point, the town will commit the land and associated area required for parking spaces to the developer through the lease agreement for building D. So, for the major site plan and the presentation from Garrett, he did show the slide that had the parking spaces for that. So within the lease agreement, we are also going to include those parking spaces required for building D. And if you look at the lease agreement, it's, I believe, the last page of the lease agreement. It actually shows you the outline, and I can go to that real quickly if you like.
So when like the parking lot has to be repaved, they're gonna pay for that portion of it.
The,
what I'm
the entire
understanding.
property is it's a net lease, so I mean, all maintenance costs,
Yeah.
windows replacements, the boilers go out, whatever, they have to,
But
Is
yeah,
there-
like the parking lot would probably all be done at the same time.
right, I mean, we would hopefully be working collaboratively on
Yes.
those types of things.
Okay.
This shows the outline for what is conveyed in the lease, and this would be better defined in an actual subdivision application. By when we go to negotiate development agreement.
Okay.
So this includes all those purple spaces, including the one strange purple space that's there in that little middle area there, and come straight down. Todd had said that a best practice is to split the road for the access road coming through. So I don't think there's really an issue there either way. Once we actually go to define this, that'll be included in the development agreement that we'll have in place this year. At least for this property. not referring to development agreements for like the whole thing yet. Any questions about that? And that provides a snow storage and different things they need on the green space there as well. And yeah. All right, I'll keep moving right along. So committing the land, next bullet point, Matt has asked the town to commit 1.5 million of infrastructure funds to Building D, of which is intended to be more fully documented in the development agreement between the parties. This can come from the infrastructure grant, for which we have 4 million in awarded funds for the infrastructure, and town funding, which kind of shows 750,000 each. Right now, within our current agreement is where that 750 could come from when it refers to town funding, is under our current agreement, because we are nowhere near the cost so far that has been approved, that the board has approved for our current pre-construction services agreement that we have.
Okay, good.
Can I comment, Michael?
Sure.
That number is going to be slightly higher because the infrastructure costs that we have been going out to take our real drawings and get real prices on is up. Also, we're doing a significantly more amount of infrastructure in the first, like, of the total amount now. You know, we were sort of targeting 60 to 70%. I would say we're probably doing 80+% of the infrastructure in the first phase. And then this is the first building in the first phase. And so we have to treat this building as if it would just be there by itself. So we have to demolish all the sewer line under building D. We have to build the rest of the sewer line, because the sewer line can't just like, dump out somewhere in Victoria Village Way. So we got to finish that and take it up north. We have to do new water lines in, you get the point. There's a bunch of stuff that really overburdens. It's a new site, so it's already got a lot of stuff to do. And then this first building has to stand on its own to make a competitive application. So good news, bad news there. Of course, in January, February, when we went through sort of a tightening of the AMIs, we dropped out most of the 25% contingency that we were holding. And we said, hey, we're gonna align the project to be what we want it to be, knowing that the cost may go up, and when the costs go up, we're gonna have to deal with costs. So here we are, 6 months later, we've done the engineering, we went out for bids. We can go out for other bids, but the costs are up. Good news is that because Building D needs to stand on its own, we have a funding source that we didn't think about before, which is more of the infrastructure is going to be done with Building D, which means a significant portion of that is going to be funded by tax credits. That wasn't in the mix before. So whereas literally 10 days ago, we presented numbers that we knew were going to change, but we wanted to give you numbers. That said, I think about $1.6 million for infrastructure for Building D. We're at like $3.8 million, and we're only going to ask for about $500,000 more from the town. So we've managed to cover most of that through the tax credit. So anyway, that number will be 2025 or 2050, excuse me.
So with that number change, does that need to be updated in the associated letter?
In the
of
letter,
support?
yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Moving right along.
Okay. So that'll change to the town has asked us to commit 1,500,000 to 2,050,000.
Correct.
And does that need to change in this other document, or is?
Yep. There's an associated letter of support. And that number can be changed in the lease agreement too. So Austin will need that number changed in the lease agreement.
So that number's not in the lease, it's just in the letter of commitment, so that nothing will need to change in the lease to make that happen. It will just be in that commitment letter, which you guys can do when you get to that item tonight, if you'd like.
All right. So again, that will be better identified and written
Gotcha.
out through the development agreement that will be forthcoming.
And that's not an increased ask from the town, that's an allocation of the ask that's been in front of the town. The $4 million that you guys have gotten awarded from
Okay.
grant dollars,
Thank you.
the $2.9 million that's long been in the contract that we have amongst ourselves, so it's not an increase, it's an allocation.
Thank you for that clarification. That makes that easier. to
Laura
make.
has her hand up.
Go ahead, Laura.
I just wanted to note that that 2,050,000 of infrastructure that is being essentially committed to by the town generates about 895,000 of tax credit equity as well.
Awesome.
Right. Next item, the developer commits to providing space for an on-site property management office in the space outlined for the commercial use in Building D. And in the lease agreement, you will see what was just approved in the site plan. Oh, no. There's the commercial space for the first floor of Building D. So I'll be allocating space within this area for that property management office. We could require Matt to be there for 5 hours a week or something if we wanted to.
So that'll take up 2 stories or 3 stories, 4 stories? The commercial.
The commercial's
No,
only
just
on
one.
one.
Lower level.
So there's actually some residential units there on the bottom as well.
Oh, so, okay, so that covers both of the commercial. Well, you could have put it maybe post office and then. management office.
Yeah, obviously we'd like to, the numbers that we have basically no credit for value there because that's what the LIHTC process requires. So we can provide the space for the management office, and then should we ever receive a sign of life from the United States Postal Service, we can also provide them space.
So on-site property management office and space outlined for commercial D. The developer successfully negotiated with the United States Postal Service. Will provide an annex of additional post office boxes within Building D in that commercial space as well. Next item, the developer will maintain the additional commercial space planned in Building D through a sublease for a commercial business or as a larger public gathering space for all residents of Victoria Village. So gives them some flexibility to provide for likely a sublease for a business in there at their sole discretion.
But if not, it could be a video game lounge for people.
There we go.
An idea.
And last item here is and highlighted, the Fraser Housing Authority will have the first right of refusal to purchase Building D for the price of the current property debt plus exit taxes. Building D will already be fully serviced by rent revenues, and there will not be an added financial commitment for the Fraser Housing Authority. Just like for what we're looking at Building C and E, the risk is on the project itself. And at this point, you already have a good understanding of what the revenues and expenses have been for this property. Basically, once the lease ends and terminates and they do not no longer are renewing it, we have the ability to purchase that property for the existing debt that's currently on the property. We could sell that. We could look at a different owner for the building. We would have a few different options there. We could look at a refinance to increase the AMIs or sustain the AMIs. Different types of things there we could do. So the timeline is Matt will apply for the LIHTC tomorrow on August 1st, if the emergency ordinance is approved. And one thing that I just want to make sure that I clarify is for emergency ordinances, it does require a 3/4 majority vote for emergency ordinances. And with 7 members, it requires at least 6 affirmative votes. Trustee Gregory was not able to be here tonight. So I just want to make sure that you guys have an understanding of, for if this is something that the board wants to approve, it would require 6 affirmative votes, essentially from everybody here, for this to move forward.
So Lewis did send me a text. And he said, hey, Katie, I'm not gonna make the meeting today, but I wanted to tell you that I've opposed the long-term lease from Victoria Village based on our outside attorney's advice. Good luck. You got advice from an outside attorney.
Well, I think it's from Austin Flanagan, our land attorney here. And we can address his concerns here in just a minute. Yep.
I thought I just.
So again, this allows them to pursue the application for August 1st. Emergency ordinance are required for any long-term lease that exceeds 1 year, which is definitely what this is. Determination of the award is anticipated by November, December at the latest. If the LIHTC is awarded to the developer, they will begin work as soon as they enter into a development improvement agreement with the town, and anticipate completion of building D by early 2027. And I think at this point we can talk about, our attorney did provide some concerns. Austin, do you want to provide just kind of your bullet points or your overview of your concerns with this agreement?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the board is aware, based off our last executive session, that this wasn't quite what we were anticipating, and that in our last executive session, we had discussed that the lease would be terminable if a development agreement wasn't entered into between the parties. And so you'll notice that term is missing, and it's missing because it would hurt the LIHTC application, and it would really diminish MAD's ability to secure the LIHTC. And so that's why that provision was removed. But to be clear, what that means is that some of these items that the board is discussing or has discussed that isn't actually written down on paper yet, those are not obligations of MAD today. It would require a development agreement between the parties to actually come to terms on those matters, and we don't have that yet. And so essentially you'd be agreeing to the lease that's only terminable, mostly terminable, I should say, if LIHTC funding isn't secured. And so it sort of operates on good faith that the parties are able to negotiate and execute a development agreement.
So, in a perfect world, kind of Austin's point, we would have a development agreement in place that discusses and very much details all the terms that between the town and for the developer in place and agreed to and approved in an open session before we enter to a master lease. If the board wants this project to move forward with the 4% application tomorrow, we, in lieu of that development agreement, we've worked to negotiate as much as we can into this lease agreement for building D. And it maintains the affordability throughout the life of the lease agreement. So all the residential units are provided for throughout this master lease, and all the different terms that we just kind of discussed. That's why I wanted to go through these terms in one at a time. And tried to provision for as much as we could in lieu of a development agreement. So if this is what we want to move forward with, then
In this lease agreement that would be included in a development agreement. What? It was windy. I had to turn my mic off. So what do you think would be included in a development agreement that we haven't covered in this lease agreement?
Yeah, I can start. That's a great question. And so really the development agreement is getting at securing the improvements. It's listing off each improvement that's going to be constructed. It's going to also list off a phasing plan to say when each improvement is required to be built out. So X improvement needs to be built before Y improvement can be built out, before a certificate of occupancy can be issued. It sort of lays out all of the trigger for how the development is going to process. And it also lays out sort of if there's any sort of off-site improvements that are going to be required as a part of this development, it would list off those triggers too to ensure that you get those improvements built out in the manner that the town would want them to. So there's a whole lot of things that kind of go into those development agreements, but that's really the big picture of it, is that it lays out in detail all of those obligations of both the parties of how you will actually build the thing that you are planning to build.
Rebuttal?
Yeah, go for it.
The Austin is absolutely correct. But the good news is we've all been working on this for 18 months. So one, you have a pretty good idea of what's being built. Two, you've approved a plat about it. Three, you've seen drawings. Four, and the most compelling one is the LIHTC application is super specific about what you do. You tell them exactly what you do. You submit the drawings. You tell them the square feet. If the square feet changes by 1 square foot, they come back and ask why it changed by 1 square foot. And back to the conversation we had a minute ago about the building needing to stand on its own. That means that we've also defined all of the infrastructure that needs to go into the building too. So while having a fully termed development agreement would be the way to go, we don't have it because we switched to us being the owner in like early July and have reconstituted the whole project around this since then. And we wouldn't have needed this lease agreement if you guys were the owner, because you were the owner of the land, you had site control, right? So by switching that, we created a problem that we had very little time to solve, right? But I think we're in a good position because we can only build exactly what we told Chaffa that we're going to build if we're awarded the tax credit. And without, by the way, it's like $16.4 million of tax credit. So it's like a lot of tax credit. Without $16.4 million there will, Todd and Matt will not be investing $16.4 million into the 30% AMI unit of our own money. So it is, I think you can make a reasonable determination that either we get an award and we do what we said we were going to do because that's the obligation for getting an award, or we don't get an award and the lease terminates. There's not really another scenario, right?
Anything else to present?
That concludes my presentation.
Okay. How do we feel, board?
I think we should go for it. It's a lot of money that we don't have to put in the project that they don't have. There's a little risk. We've got the plans. If we can get, if they can get 16.4 million tax credit, that's gonna help this thing go and not protect the project.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
It's
We
affordable
need-
housing.
We really need a post office here, but I get the difficulties.
Sorry, I think someone's might be maybe turned off. I'm not sure I heard any.
Oh, I know. I turned it off again. It's the wind behind me. It keeps making the. Sorry. So I am support of this because it's going to help us get this off the ground. We got this to help them with the 16.4 million of tax credit. It's going to make it happen. And we need a post office annex. If the postal service can work with anyone, that would be awesome. And I don't see that there's really that big of a risk to the town about anything. I don't see that we're really risking anything. So I'm turning off my mic.
I concur with Katie. I think the risk is minimal and I think the upside is huge. And I think we can solve the legal ease issues as we move forward, because I think everybody's committed to doing a good job. So I'm in favor.
Yeah.
I guess I would echo those opinions, and to acknowledge the fact that there is not a development improvement agreement in place. I think that's an obstacle that we can deal with at the time if we start butting heads or for some reason. I mean, I saw it the same way as you're going through that process for LIHTC anyway. It's just kind of a different lens. So I think it's favorable. And if there is an issue at that point in time, we tackle it then.
Sounds good. Yeah.
For now.
All right. Well, it sounds like we probably have consensus among the six of us. So if someone would like to make a motion.
I move to approve ordinance 515, series 2024, an emergency ordinance of the Board of Trustees, the Town of Fraser, Colorado, approving a lease agreement with Mountain Affordable Housing Development LLC for a certain property in the town.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 6-0. Motion carries. Thanks, guys. Okay. Now we have, let's see. Did we go through the town funding letter?
We had talked, it's just the next item here.
Yeah.
Kind of just complementary to that discussion. So, with the funding commitment letter, per what Matt discussed earlier, we just need to change the number on the letter. What is that, third paragraph?
Okay.
1.68.
Oh.
So that was 1.5 plus, I think, just some valuation for the land.
Oh, yes, that's right. But now that it is a lease, there is no valuation for the land, so we're.
So what do you need that number to be again? 2005?
20500000.
2,050,000.
Correct.
Correct. So if the board is in favor of that, we'll just be looking for a motion to approve that letter with that change.
Almost take a motion to approve letter of
It's a town funding letter.
the contract and
Is there a second?
1.5 to
2.05.
2.05.
Just to, Laura, that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay.
2050. You're correct.
Thank you.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
Okay.
We'll call the quarter at the Fraser Housing Authority. It's just 2,000.
Okay, sounds good. All right, does anyone have any updates that can't wait until next week?
Nope.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. We will be going into the Fraser Housing Authority meeting immediately after this, just so everyone's aware.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay. Now, do we have an agenda for that?
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Laura.
Austin. Appreciate you guys.
Mr. Mayor, we're gonna take a pause and restart a new meeting since they're two separate meetings.
Okay,